here. And I want to thank a couple of people you may not be seeing right now. One is Hilary Molina, who's in the background with slides and looking after the recording and so forth. And I'm speaking to you, I'm Alice MacGillivray. I'm speaking to you from Gabriola Island, which forms part of the story we'll be looking at today in sustainability leadership. And I just want to mention that this photo you see in front of you is some of the participants of a fielding intensive that took place on Gabriola Island pre-COVID. And my co-host, Trevor Maber, is the silhouette on the right-hand side there. He might tell you later about one of his swimming experiences during the intensive. So first of all, I would like to, in the spirit of all the people and groups behind us, thank the Sustainability Advisory Council at Fielding. I would like to thank President Katrina Rogers for all her support over the years about sustainability advocacy and scholarship. And I'm going to turn it over to her to speak to you now. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be a part of the alumni conference for Fielding Graduate University. And I was very pleased, Alice, and your colleagues for stepping up in offering this particular story today about what we do at Fielding in terms of sustainability leadership and how we think of it very much from this systemic and systems orientation. And since sustainability is my field, I'm going to take the opportunity to just say a few words about how I've been thinking about sustainability leadership and some of the research that I've been doing. I'm sure that all of you on the call read a great deal. So you know quite a bit probably about environmental issues more generally. But in the last decade, it's really been striking to me that we're really seeing much more of a turn towards championing sustainability in organizations throughout all the sectors, nonprofit, government, and corporate sector. In fact, as I was making my way to this call just a few minutes ago, I noticed that President Biden was on the news and I believe signing some climate change executive order today. I don't know the details, but I think it just is another indication of how this is coming up into the public sphere and across the sectors. For instance, if you look at the Harvard Business Review, they have really begun to champion sustainability this last decade, taking a position that a green business strategy, for example, is no longer an option, it's an imperative. If you look at articles on corporate social responsibility, they're a regular feature of the journal now from various presses, not just Harvard, but many other presses that are tied of books on sustainability and what it means for different sectors. And what's interesting is that if you think about this research, it kind of reveals both a pull and a push mechanism that motivate organizations towards becoming more sustainable. The pull is actually from leaders who see sustainability as the next frontier in organization development. So you can really see leadership stepping up into these roles. And the push is from market forces and regulatory pressures that are requiring organizational leaders to consider new ways to accomplish their goals and take into consideration, some would call it the triple bottom line. Since people are numerous and the planet is singular and profits uncertain, it's a resource issue. It's a considerable source of stress in organizations and opportunities, I think, for leaders. And the triple bottom line refers to the social, environmental, and economic components of sustainable practices. And what makes, so just, I won't go on into that, but there's a lot of research done on that. Like, where is that Venn diagram and how does an organization think about a triple bottom line framework for their own functioning? But what makes sustainability different from other organizational challenges and opportunities, and for those of you who work in this area, I think you could really think about these nuances, is that sustainability calls for real change in thinking and behavior and practice at every level. And it builds on initiatives from every individual in an organization. So in other words, it really draws on practices and requires a collective. So it's not just theory, but it's really those sharing of real experience across organizational boundaries. So there's some transboundaries, dynamics to sustainability work, as well as sectors and national borders and so on. So in this respect, a systemic understanding of sustainability leadership is critical, and as is a systemic and sort of a collective understanding of what's leadership, right? And I think it's in this spirit that today's session will be undertaken. I participated in the Eco Village when I was faculty and associate dean for the Human and Organization Development Program, and it was a very powerful experience because it connected many of these ideas, and I'm looking forward to hearing from others today about the more recent experiences related to the Eco Village. Today's keynote is sponsored by the Sustainability Advisory Council to the President. I just wanted to say a word on that council. The council emerged from the Sustainable Working Group, which was a group that was created very much organically, students, alumni, and faculty, to bring attention to these issues within the fielding learning community. Many of you are on the call today, but I think of Julie Schmesig-O'Brien, Alice MacGillivray right here, the faculty who are presenting today were some of the early originators of the Sustainable Working Group. Carol Castle, many of you know your colleagues, and many I have not enumerated, but I'm sure you're with us today in spirit, if not in actuality. So the council emerged from that group, and it's really more specific to advise me as the president on things like this: organizing public events, which we're doing right now, making recommendations to me on sustainability initiatives that we can make sure are embedded in our strategic planning, to make recommendations to me on activities that could improve sustainability in our own operations, so how we do business, to help me communicate our commitment to sustainability and social justice, and to help the university establish our goals and outcomes. This keynote also fits perfectly into the overarching conference theme, Global Leading and Learning in the Next Decade. When you think about it, leaders within every different sphere have enormous impact globally as purveyors of our fundamental values ultimately. And there are many organizations that have quite rightly come under fire for leading organizations that enact many unethical and unsustainable practices. But however, without leaders and without a kind of deep thinking around it, we're never going to make the kind of progress we need to commit together as a world community to advance planetary health and the health of our species. So welcome again. And I now turn to our panelists, Rich Appelbaum, David Willis, Alice MacGillivray, Trevor Maber, Diane Phan, Rick Spann, and Fred Steier for the session. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Katrina. We want all of you who are with us today to have a sense of the people just mentioned, people who came to the intensive as resource people now or later. And we also want to learn more about you, your interests, who you are, why you're here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Trevor.
Thanks very much, Alice. So we have a placeholder slide here, and this is basically our introductory slide. I'm going to start with our faculty members that are joining us here that were part of this particular intensive that was held on Gabriola Island back in tail end of May 2019. And I think many of us, as we've been working through these planning calls here in pandemic times with the COVID pandemic surrounding us, are very much wishing, longing for those days of reconvening in person. So what you're going to hear for the next few minutes here, and I'll start with Dr. David Blake Willis to give his perspective on his interests, hopes for today. I think it's very telling that we're out over 18 months, year and a half since this intensive was held, and a core group of us here are still very much keeping the energy alive, the experience alive from that session. I'm looking through our list here. I know we have in fact one of the fielding staff members who is part of the intensive. They're in a supportive role, but I think also bringing some other perspective to the experience as well. We have Rick Spann here, who is a friend and collaborator with fielding, who is also part of this intensive. Myself and Alice as alumni of fielding. So we'll go through the entire team that's here just to share a little bit of who they are, and I think what brought them to that intensive and what brought them to this this conversation here today. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Trevor. Did you want me to advance the slide?
Sure. Let's jump on to that next slide. Sure, thanks.
So David Blake Willis, I'm actually speaking to you from 4 a.m. Kobe, Japan right now. We came here for some family matters at the end of last year and have stayed because of the pandemic. My goodness, it would be wonderful to be on Gabriola Island right now. Alice and I began talking about doing something on Gabriola Island. Oh my goodness, Alice, quite a few years ago now. To dream and to dream big, and especially around sustainability issues, seemed to be where we were going with the idea of an intensive. Of course, systems intensives, there's a long and storied history around systems intensives. Our colleague and dear friend Fred Steier is probably the best representative of that, with the systems intensives that were held in Bethel, Maine, and other places, and of course the Eco Village, which you'll be hearing about as well. So my role in this was really, along with Alice, getting it kind of started. Is it possible to do it? It seemed like a bit of a pipe dream at the beginning, but why not? You just, as I said, dream and dream big, and something may happen. My interests and hopes today, I'm very concerned with the planet and where it's going. Gabriola Island in many ways is a microcosm of what's happening on the planet. And we spent, we were there 3-4 days, I think it was altogether, 3 nights, 4 days perhaps. And it was very revealing what is going on in this idyllic island, seemingly idyllic island. In fact, many issues that are around the planet are revealed right there on Gabriola. And you'll be hearing more about that. Trevor, who would you like to go next? Who would you like to go
Let's jump to Fred, if you wouldn't mind, Fred.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor, and thank you, David, and thanks, Katrina, and thank you, Alice. So just a little bit of context setting that David actually mentioned, the history of intensives that we've done, and looking at the participant list, I see some very familiar old friends who have attended and participated in and even led some of our older intensives. The one that David mentioned that for me was such a landmark occasion was the Bethel Systems one that we did with Charlie Seashore, Edie Seashore, Jane Jorgensen, Terry Porchant. And what was special about that, among many things, was how we tried to evoke a sense of place and the idea of thinking about what is local and what is global, but also being part of the very community in Bethel that we were learning about. And what was particularly interesting in terms of a connection with Gabriola is that the vision of Bethel with the National Training Labs, the old NTL site that Kurt Lewin was partially responsible for, is that they envisioned it as an island, a cultural island, and intentionally chose this place that was not very easy to get to, particularly in February. So the connection between the Bethel systems and the Gabriola intensive, where in Gabriola we were literally on an island, had to take a ferry to get there, was quite striking. Katrina also mentioned the Eco Village intensive, and there, Katrina, I remember digging potatoes with you there. So we literally turned these into opportunities for action of doing things together. But again, learning about what it means for a community to be a system and to think about its sustainability and what they wanted to hold on to locally, but also what that meant for sustainability of the planet. Yeah, so a little bit of context in the history of different intensives about cultivating a sense of place, which is so important right now.
Thanks very much, Fred. I'll jump to Rich, and then we'll go to Diane next.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to see you all and to see all these. I was going to say old familiar faces. You're not all old, but you are familiar faces. I came to Gabriola kind of indirectly on a bicycle trip with my adult daughter and wife through that area, and fell in love with the island, and was really stoked to be part of an intensive there. You know, in my long history with fielding, I've come to appreciate the importance of the sort of intimate face-to-face aspect of fielding combined with the distance learning, which we've all been had to deal with entirely this past year. And intensives are a place where, well, they are intensive. They're sort of like extended cluster meetings, although people can come from anywhere. And those of you who have participated know what the experience is like. And Gabriola, as well as two other intensives I've been a part of in Santa Barbara, it's really an opportunity to explore the local community and for students to maybe get one or two knowledge areas well underway, connected with it. But the main thing is the interaction with local people and with one another, which I really think is really at the core of Fielding's unique learning model. As many of you know, I share the sustainability leadership doctoral concentration in Fielding. I've been a part of Katrina's advisory council and then the sustainability working group really since the beginning. And although I've always been somewhat skeptical of corporate social responsibility, I couldn't help but notice today in the business section of the New York Times that BlackRock, which is the world's largest investment firm, is directing all of its clients to go green, carbon zero footprint over the next couple of decades. And I think they mean it. I think we are at a transition point, at a turning point right now. We have to be, and I'm encouraged by the Biden administration. So I really look forward to this. We'll hear from a lot of people who are participating in this intensive. And I see it as really a sort of a benchmark for future once we can freely travel, hopefully within a year, and once again get together face to face without carrying a little bit of fear with us. So, and I want to thank Alice especially, who to me represents Gabriola Island in so many ways and has really done all of the legwork in pulling this together.
Thanks, Rich. Diane, I'll turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you very much. So I had the very unique opportunity. For those who don't know me, I'm actually a staff member that got to join in on this intensive. And what was lovely about this is I had just started working at Fielding. And one of the first things that landed in my lap was this big idea to go to Gabriola Island. And when I first started at Fielding, you know, I knew what Fielding espoused about sustainability, about social and ecological justice. But I think we all know that sometimes that's not always the way. And to see, as those things are very important to me, it was wonderful to see Fielding kind of walk the walk and get to join in on this intensive where people were truly trying to change the world and see what they could do in keeping our planet. So I was delighted to get to join in this opportunity to see how this small community, they can do so many big things because of sort of the small footprint and sort of adopting everything that I learned and applying it to my community. So it was great for me to be able to soak in all of the experiences, both from the people on the island and the lovely faculty that I got to experience with and the students. And it was great as a staff member to truly feel a part of the community and truly feel what the Fielding community was about. So I'm just hoping to keep that energy going, hear what people have to say as we all march forward and continue to try to implement these changes into our own communities. So I'm very excited for today.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And Rick, I will turn it over to you for your brief intro.
Hi. Well, it's great to be here. I'm saying hi from Amsterdam here. It's really, really, really wonderful to see some people again that I missed for some time. I was introduced by Sergey, my great friend Sergey, as a guest a few years ago at Fielding, and I fell in love immediately with everything happening there, but also with the people and also the sound.
So what's brought you to this conversation today as well?
Okay, I will briefly say a few things. One is that this was the third intensive in which I'd been very involved, the other two at the Eco Village in Shawnigan Lake area. And one of the things I'll do is sort of speak to the differences of those two experiences as a member of the alumni, working alongside fielding people and local people. But I think what I'd like to do now, because I'm going to be speaking more later, is hand it back to you and we can learn a little bit more about people attending. The one final thing I'll say is I hope those of you in this session are already getting a sense of the collective leadership that President Rogers spoke about, because everyone here you've heard from, including staff, guests, faculty, alumnus, and so on, as well as many other people, really shared leadership in this context. And I think that's one of the things that Rick was mentioning, that it was sort of magic to see. So back to you, Trevor.
Sure. Thanks, Alice. So I'm going to invite everyone that's on our session today. That's all of you who are here as participants or attendees that are interested in this experience and hearing a bit more about what the fielding intensive model looks like, to in the chat window, which you can probably open up if you're on the desktop version of Zoom. You should be able to slide your mouse onto the presentation screen and see the row of menu buttons at the bottom. I think most people are intimately familiar with Zoom months into the pandemic here. Just open up the chat window and make sure it's set to everyone in the meeting. And I'll ask you to share a bit about yourselves as well now. If you want to do it all as one entry, and then that way we won't have quite as much of a scatter of information, but who you are and even where you are right now. We've heard that we are literally covering the globe, just even with the presenters and the panelists here today. What's your role or connection to fielding? I'm looking at names. I see we have a lot of familiar names and faces here from fielding, ranging from current students to alum to faculty and otherwise. And also, what brought you to our session today? What's your interest, hope, what particular piece of the puzzle saw? Have everyone just pop that into the chat window, and we'll just have this stream of introductory consciousness showing up in the chat window. As you're doing that, I'll share a quick little introduction of myself. As Alice and I were the two alumni attending the session, Alice being the on-site host living on Gabriola Island and very intimately connected into the community, and as David mentioned, really orchestrating that. And we have our chat open now. I was thinking back, and it's always a question of how did you find your way into this, and I think as a fairly recent grad from the HOD program back in 2018, and looking around the screen, knowing some of you are in the similar place, either coming up to or past graduation with PhD after your title here, I was very drawn, I think, throughout my fielding journey, just to this opportunity to learn in relationship. And I think learning relationship not only with other students, but also going to many of the national sessions and being in the room with alumni and looking at them and thinking, wow, they don't have as many wrinkles and they don't look as stressed as I am. I can't wait to be on that side of the room. And also, especially, with the faculty and this notion of partnership. Yes, we're all here wearing certain roles. We have, certain jobs to do, so to speak, but just a real collaborative approach to how learning happens and how learning is co-constructed. And so when this came up, I'm actually, it sparked for me when David and a few others were sharing. It would have been the winter session in January of 2019, and I was in, I think it was the opening evening reception, and David had printed off some brochures, handout, just flyers about this intensive, things had already been coming together. And I remember running into you as you're setting them out on the tables, David, and you handed one to me. You're like, Trevor, I really think you want to come to this. You need to take a look at this. And I think that was just so telling of the relational nature of what is fielding, what is this organization called fielding, how do things happen here. And so leading up to that, coming to Gabriola Island, I'm a fellow Canadian, a little bit down the road from Alice. I'm in wintry Saskatchewan right now, but again, the whole notion of sustainability and not just the the environmental climate orientation that some people have to sustainability, but looking at it from a very holistic sense, looking at it from, as even Katrina in her introduction mentioned, a systems approach or a systems lens on sustainability was really appealing to me. My background is mainly in the OD space. I'm a business school professor, so I'm trying to embed and imbue that with my students to say, you're going into the world as future business professionals, but you have an obligation now. You have a collective responsibility in terms of guiding and shaping the world through your organizations, through the corporations you're working through, and even through as being educated, involved, active citizens of your country, of your region. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to I see we have many of the introductions popping up here, and please feel free to scroll through those. I think it's a real good mosaic of what brings everyone here. As you heard from all of us, we had different intentions, different reasons for gathering, coming together, and it's great to see some of that replicated here. So back to you, Alice, and we're going to spend the rest of our time together here really diving deep into what was this intensive about, and where did we go with it.
Thank you. If you could put it on the next slide, David, that would be great. So I guess there are 3 sections we have planned today. That the first is to get to know each other a little bit better and get some context. The purpose is, we have some purposes to give you hopefully a feel for what intensive experiences can be like, especially if you've never been on one before. Some connections amongst the people on this call and your networks, because there's power in connections. To talk about place-based and experiential learning. And as Trevor said, to look ahead. We really want to engage you in the latter part of the call, thinking about the future. So this, of course, is not Gabriola Island. It's much more tropical. We are in a rainforest here, a temperate rainforest, but it reminded me of the many paths in learning that people could take when they go to one of these things. It's not a strict curriculum. It's a buffet of learning options, a buffet of experiences that people can shape to their own research interests and careers. By the way, if you're not aware, Trevor and Diane, and I think there was somebody else, had a backdrop that is from Gabriola. So that gives you another feel for what it was like to be there. So let's move ahead to look at a couple of eco-village intensive slides here, David. We had 2 experiences on Vancouver Island near Shawnigan Lake, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about those. Those were the first 2 that I'd been very involved with. And we've mentioned place-based. I think Fred may have raised that, and David and others. On the left, you see Christine Ho. Some of you know her. She's no longer a professor at Fielding, but was in the past an anthropologist. And beside her is Orson Linton, another alumnus. Both very, very interesting people. And I had picked them up in Victoria to drive them up to the Eco-Village. And we stopped just outside Victoria on Vancouver Island in an old grove of Western red cedar. Christine lives in Miami. Coincidentally, they're both from Trinidad and Tobago, and their accents got stronger as we drove up island. But what a geographic shift to go from Miami to a scene like this. And I think that kind of disruption in one's surroundings can be a real catalyst for learning. And then on the right, you see us at the Eco-Village, and Christine, who's often pretty urban, is about to have her first composting toilet experience that she was a little bit nervous about, but she fared well and actually became a convert. And on to the next slide, David, to show you a little bit more about the Eco-Village site. Some of the pictures here are in the yurt, where we spent quite a bit of the time, a big yurt. Some people slept in the yurt, some camped on the property, some went to B&Bs. And I just tried to point out here what a lovely learning environment it was, very egalitarian. I love that picture of Fred, lying back in, one could say, student mode, learning mode, listening to Brandy Gallagher, the executive director. a couple there, a student, Susan Mazer on the left, and her husband Dallas. He usually came to sessions, and they're doing some improvisational music there in the yurt. There are several stories around that. Intergenerational, you know, it was really quite magical. In terms of being an alumna helping to put these things together, this one was, it didn't feel simple at the time, but it was simple in that Brandy really wanted connections with universities. She's a real go-getter. And so it was, a lot of it was a one-to-one partnership, putting this together locally for a given small acreage where they've been leaders across North America in changing bylaws and in helping to embed sustainability in practices and in laws as well. So then let's transition to Gabriola Island here for the next images. So I want to give you an overview of Gabriola. Here's a not unexpected sign at the Haven where we stayed, which is a personal retreat center. And that was on their menu board, welcoming the fielding group. Down below, it's a sort of a typical Gabriola scene. It's about the size of Manhattan, about 4,000 residents, sometimes described as 4,000 opinions surrounded by water, and left-leaning politically, older demographic, as is, you know, in general, this part of the world. Many PhDs, many people with a lot of formal education, but the whole spectrum socially in terms of income and background. So move ahead, David. So a lot of what we did was as a full group. We didn't spend much time at the Haven indoors because you can spend time indoors anywhere. We wanted to really get a feel for the community and the issues and the ecosystems. The Commons is a 26-acre property that used to be a goat farm that is run by absolute consensus in its governance. Some people say that doesn't work, but they've been going for decades and really making a difference on the island with several initiatives. On the lower right, there's Rick in the foreground, and people are listening to elected official Scott Colburn talk about the many layers of governance that are unique to the Gulf Islands here and how they work, how tricky it can be to navigate them. And then I also wanted to give you a feel for the local engagement and what you see in the upper right. First, I'll mention in the background, a medical center and helipad totally built with local donations of labor and materials, which is, you know, I can't speak for the States, but extremely unusual in Canada, probably a first. And in the foreground, you see the president of one of the local not-for-profit organizations, GALT, Gabriola Lands and Trails and Trusts. I have to always remind myself. But the specific thing I want to point out, you'll notice that the president standing there, all the other former presidents are in the background, chose a map of Cascadia. So, you know, he and his group had a lot of fun putting together an experience and really emphasized from the first moments the connections between our countries, if you're in the US or Canada, and about how we share ecosystems, sustainability challenges, all sorts of things, despite the 49th parallel, and how distinct the countries can be at sometimes, like the last 4 years. So yeah, let's move on from there to look at some of the small group learning. One of the things that was a treat for me personally was in working with Dave Bodley, who's he was at the time an elder in training, a master cedar weaver, as you can see from his hat. He was so open to teaching me about appropriate Indigenous protocols for work with the Sinamuk people. So I could just go up to him and say, you know, did I make any mistakes there? You know, what can you help me with? And that was absolutely fabulous. So those gifts were ones we discussed in advance and he sort of coached me on, and that was a treat for me. We were just coming out of a trail where we looked at petroglyphs. So let's move on to some of the field trips. We divided into 4 groups, And just to give you a taste of them, here we have Sandy on the left, who'd come in from Shanghai, and she's at an alpaca farm where they spin, weave, sell their goods, but they also have a partnership with Peru, where the women there do weaving and cloth garments and send them up to the gift shop here. Meanwhile, in another part of the island, another group was looking at Gabriola's most sustainable private home. And, you know, any of these things we could talk about for hours. But you'll see a couple of things here, the cob natural plaster breathing walls. And you see the pipe coming down into the cistern for rainwater harvesting to reduce drawing on the aquifers on the island for water. And next slide, David. Thank you. A couple of other images of our small group tours. Heather Cameron is in the upper left, and she is a fabric artist who does really, really interesting things. It took her about an hour per square inch on this particular piece of work. And I'll just point out a couple of things. The very strange looking animals are accurate representations of the first known drawings of animals in Canada by a Jesuit priest who traveled here. And I know the font is small, but maybe you'll be able to look at it in more detail later. There's even a quote from a microbiologist that fit into this sort of Gaia-connected view of the world. We also went to the School of the Building Arts on Gabriola, where they teach people from around the world, primarily from Europe, about different kinds of timber frame building without screws or nails or anything. And those buildings are aged on site and shipped to many parts of the world. Okay, let's move on. And this is the last images I have to share with you from the small group. I mean, there are hundreds of them, but the small group tours. One of our tour hosts, who's not in these pictures, she was in an earlier one, Toby, has been an advocate for many things on the island, including tiny houses. And tiny houses, believe it or not, are illegal on Gabriola because they're too tiny. So they don't meet the requirements for being a house. So she's been fighting this for years, and rather than staying in permission mode, she set up a series of tiny house building workshops that people have come to, and people like the fellow on the left in the foreground have taught them about building these sorts of structures. And she's now living in this house. She's finished it and moved it to another location. And she's also coordinating a housing initiative on the island. So it's full of people who take chances and take initiative and ask permission later and shake up the system. That's a reputation for the island. Okay, go forward, please, David. So having had that quick overview, are there any things that people who, and I don't even know, I haven't been keeping a close line on the participants. Is there anybody else with us who was on this trip that we've missed? And, you know, are there any comments that you have based on what we just looked at? Anybody? Okay, sounds like we didn't miss anybody, which is great. So let's move ahead to look at this topic of staying involved as alumni, because often in universities we think of alumni as places from which to solicit donations and financial support, which is important, but there's so many other things that can happen. So let's move ahead to the next slide, David. And Trevor, you've been thinking about this for a long time. I heard you talking about it at the intensive. You know, how can we make these things valuable? How can we tweak things? How can we get alumni more involved? So over to you.
Great, thanks, thanks, Alice. So I think one thing, and I know the faculty will be offering some context at the end on this, is this intensive also served the purpose of being a practical experiential KA for many of the students who are attending. I'm looking through our list of participants, and I don't think we were able to get any of the current students who were at the intensive on with us today. And I think, it would have been really interesting to add that perspective into the mix as well. So I think, keeping in mind that, yes, this intensive was a way to bring all of the facets of fielding, and you've heard from alumni, staff, faculty, friends of fielding, and also the students in the mix. And I think that becomes a real practical piece for them. And those of you that are students, alum, faculty, anyone associated with fielding, would understand that knowledge area KA process and the learning expectations that come with that, and the academic rigor, the scholarly elements that are woven into that. But I think the biggest question here, and looking at the names I see in the attendee list here, knowing many of you are alumni or students progressing towards becoming alumni, is this question of how do you remain involved and continue to have some of the same types of engagement, the same learning opportunities that you had as students once you shift into alumni mode. And I know for myself, and Alice mentioned she's been to numerous intensives wearing the hat of being an alum, but I found for myself that going to the winter session, summer sessions, it was a great experience, and I'm looking forward to when we're able to reconvene in some manner, fashion towards those. And here we are in the online world. I imagine some version of this may continue forward, but I think those sessions didn't have quite the same. I guess the best word is intensity, as the intensive did for me as an alum, coming back into the fielding circle, being part of the fielding community. And I think it was really fascinating for me. Alice had a very defined, prescribed role as the master orchestrator. There were so many moving parts, just bringing together the intensive in her home location, that she really had a lot of things on the go. She had a lot of plates spinning there. But for myself, I came in as this alum, as a guest, as a member of this learning experience in this intensive. And to be honest, at first I thought, well, what exactly am I coming here for? What am I hoping to get from this experience, as an alum of fielding, but also, what am I hoping to contribute? What's the give here? And I think that was a really interesting dynamic that played out for me. I mean, there was the opportunity to reconnect and continue conversations with some of the faculty, but I also found myself in I don't think it was a formal mentor role, but I did find myself having numerous conversations with the active students. They were asking about fielding, they were working through the processing of this intensive experience, what it meant, what they should do with it. There were some very pragmatic considerations as they were thinking through, some of the KA deliverables that they had associated with the intensive. But I found, that picture that Alice had at the start, where there's 4 of us standing in the water. There were so many conversations that were happening after hours. So, if you think of your experience at winter sessions or summer sessions, it's very much kind of a popcorning experience here, from one to the next to the next to the next. Imagine if you could take just one workshop, one session at a winter session or a summer session, as David said, spread that out over 4 days and 3 nights. So you come into this, this temporary system, into this learning community with a mix of faculty, of students, of alumni such as ourselves. In this case, we had the good fortune of having Diane as a staff member, and just really co-create this learning space and in some ways, a bit of an action research space as we're going out into the community, we're having the conversations and so forth. And I think, a really key element with this is, Alice walked through and shared the photos and shared the experiences. But as we were going into those spaces, as we were going into those conversations, everyone, I think, from our our community that convened was approaching it from the space of curiosity and inquiry. We were wanting to learn and understand more and see how we could contribute, how we could bring our individual and collective areas of expertise, our wisdom, to support this community, to help them shift some of the big challenges, issues, opportunities they were having. As I think back, what's one of the things that really stuck for me was just the possibilities that were created through those conversations. I think, if you think around a systems perspective, you have this system called Gabriola Island, and literally a system on an island. And all of a sudden you have this intervention coming in, which is the form of this fielding intensive. And I think, it really stirred a lot of things up on all fronts in that respect. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift into bringing you as our participants into the conversation a bit here. We still have about just under 45 minutes in our session. We want to use some of this time for those of you that came here, and I skimmed through the chat window, and I see this common theme, which is a big sigh of relief on my part. People are here because they're curious about this question of intensives, maybe particular to the realm space of sustainability and sustainability leadership. But we want to take an opportunity over the next few minutes here to shift the ball into your court, so to speak, and give you a chance to think this through. And we're actually going to here in Zoom, give the breakout rooms a go and break out into some smaller conversations to be able to say, what's resonating for you, what's coming up here. So I think, the first question I'd like to pose to you, and this is just an individual reflective moment here before we shift into the breakout rooms, is thinking about this idea of an intensive, the idea of being able to convene someday, not too far down the road, physically in person, with this subset of the fielding community. And this can look quite different in the context of location, geography, intention, and so forth. But what would the intensive of your dreams look like if you were going to say, okay, that you guys have got me curious about this, I think I'd like to be part of an intensive, show up at one of these intensives when the opportunity surfaces again. What would it look like? What kinds of experiences? What would you want to think into that giving and getting? What would you want to get from the intensive? What value would you see in attending, traveling to an intensive? What contribution would you see yourself potentially bringing to that? What would make a great intensive for you is another way to frame that. So just give you a moment to think on that. If you have any notes you want to jot down for yourselves, and then we're going to break into some breakout rooms. I see we have 31 participants, so we'll try and get about 5 people in a room here, and then we'll have about 10 minutes. If the conversation's going well, might go a little bit extra, and just a chance to delve into that. So yeah, any thoughts from anyone else? I see Rich.
Yeah, I'd like just to add one thing to your excellent presentation, to Alice's wonderful recounting. Sustainability and fielding, we've emphasized the ecological aspect, but there's also the social aspect of sustainability. And Alice touched on then talking about the tiny houses, which are being used in Santa Barbara to a limited extent to deal with the homeless, problems of the homeless population. So I would just urge you, when you think about sustainability, make sure that the social side as well as the ecological side is covered, because they are interrelated systemically. And I'll make that point and leave it there.
Great, thanks, Rich.
Let me share one tiny example of that from Gabriola, because I know some people struggle with the two of them being so interrelated. A program at People for a Healthy Community trained homeless people by master gardeners to become quite good gardeners. And they were paired with people with means to come and work in their gardens on everything from landscaping to organic food production. So there are many of those. Think, as Rich said, about those intersections. And we're interrupting their few minutes of reflective time, but
which is what we always do. Trevor, can I add just one other thought?
Of course.
Please do, Fred.
Just something that occurred to me as you and Alice were talking about what was so special about Gabriola to you, Alice, for example. But what is also so special to Brandy Gallagher at Shawnigan Lake. And that is in the breakout groups, you might also, to offer a bit more concreteness, think about a place that really matters to you. And if you were the host, with all of our help, for holding an intensive there that brought together alumni, students, faculty, neighbors. There's a lot of trust involved, right, Alice, that we didn't disrupt things too much. But how would you design an intensive around a place that really matters to you, and what features of that space make it stand out as a place that could be a good hosting site?
Trevor, can I just make one totally unrelated, off the wall comment that just happened? On my screen, Rick Spann and Mickey Berg are next to each other. They're little squares. And for some reason, Rick just gestured over towards Mickey. And at that very moment, Mickey took a water bottle. And for a moment, I thought we were actually together sharing something physically. It was just a wonderful moment. Thank you both.
We do.
Right.
Lovely, lovely. Okay, so think on your own for a few minutes, and then you'll be in breakout rooms. Don't censor yourselves. Don't get those little voices coming in about that wouldn't work because. So have fun.
So we'll head off into breakout rooms in just a moment here, and we'll give you a good 10 minutes, I think, just to have a brief conversation, what's really sparking for you, as you can hear from the commentary just now, in terms of the possibilities. This is a dream space. What would the ideal intensive look like for you? What would it bring? Where would it be? How would it convene? And go from there. And then we'll have a chance to come back hear a little bit from that, some comments from faculty, and then we'll bring a real solid, if you're still interested and feeling like you want to roll up your sleeves a bit on this, how do we proceed forward from there? All right, here we go, everyone. We'll see you in your breakout rooms. Sure, for many folks, it was that dreaded Zoom countdown timers on the screen, like, oh no, we're just getting into it. Oh, come on, Trevor.
Trevor, that's one of the things that we've learned to do is we ask people to complete their sentences in the chat, but they have a character count of like 50 or something like that, or either just to say what they were about to say all at once right now, just to get it out.
Sure. So I think we'll, and this may be a little tricky in terms of the groups, because I know we were just automatically scattered into our breakout rooms, but maybe we'll just ask to hear from somebody from each of the rooms briefly. So I see Isabel, why don't you jump in? You were in our room, and then we'll just go around and try and work our way through this. Sure.
Trevor, before we do, could I just mention a few people have joined us since before the breakout, and one is Milton Lopes, our former faculty member, and I'd like to welcome him back. It's wonderful to see you, Milton.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Trevor. I'm glad you got the doctorate.
Reach that finish line. Reach the finish line.
Yeah.
Over to you.
I have a book of yours.
Oh, sir, go ahead, Milton. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think I have a book of yours.
Well, I hope it is found a good home on your shelf. So there we go.
I actually read it, but I don't remember. But yeah.
Okay, back to business. Where were we?
All good.
Okay. First of all, the message has been disabled, and David, it's wonderful to see you as well. Our group, we met and talked a little bit about sustainable building and tiny home communities, and the opportunity for alums to participate in the programs. I haven't been a part of any program with Fielding since I left in 2017. This is my first interaction, and I was happy to see this is the first one of the week that I've attended where there was an invitation for those of us who have attended. I did not earn my PhD. Let me just put that out there right now. I have my master's from Fielding. to participate in something like this. And I found it, because I'm new in my final community after 30 years of traveling with the Army, that what I'm trying to bring here is, sustainable thinking, sustainable building, and opportunities to lower the carbon footprint for anyone who is looking for a new home. And we started talking more and more about that, and how the alum community can be included and engaged. And then also what was brought up is the Institute for Social Innovation, which I had forgotten about until today. So that was another opportunity, another way for those of us who would like to could interact with Fielding again. Did I get that, Trevor?
Oh yeah, no, that's great.
Okay.
That's yeah, those are right on the money. Thanks. Sure. Someone from another group that like to share a couple of thoughts that came up in your room.
Fred, you're on.
Hi, this is Carl. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, not too far from the picture is actually from Mountain Quest, which is two alumni, Alex and David Bennett. They have like 450 acres out in Frost, West Virginia. They have somewhere between 25 and 30,000 books. Charlie Seashore, actually, they had a couple of intensives quite a few years ago. So obviously with having that many books and hiking trails and stuff, it could lend itself to having some kind of writing intensive, particularly if there was, I was thinking if we had a monograph that was kind of getting close, you could actually have a team there, because they've got 10 rooms, so as part of the inn. So
I love that. I know in our room as well, we started into some pretty specific ideas around, the place and the locality of an intensive. So, anyone from another room that has some thoughts? Mickey, I see your hand up.
Yeah,
There.
well, I think that Ziva put it, it's called the Fielding Fix, and all of you know what that is. And I think that Diane was in our group, and she expressed the fact, because after I had said that I really can't remember too much about particular sessions that I went to in any of the, and I never missed a session, and I was in Fielding forever. I was kind of slow, but I think it's because I never wanted to leave. But the thing is, what I do remember, I remember so many of you so well from that. What I do remember is the networking and the relationships and the encouragement at Fielding, that it's not about becoming a PhD, it's about going through a life transformation. And then Diane said, I came in as a staff, and it was really surprising to me that all of a sudden I was engaged and I was brought into this and I was a part of this, even though I was a staff member. And I mean, I met Taya, who many of you remember. She was my advisor, and I think I might not have finished if it weren't for her coaching me. Taya and I remain close friends. I was just invited to her new wedding, and I remember when I met Sergey, and today it's things like when you were on the last call and said, "Hi, Mickey, it's good to see you." That's the Fielding Fix. I gave a suggestion in Michigan, because we hosted, Taya and I, Ziva and I hosted the 45th anniversary celebration. Was it the 45th anniversary celebration? And Judy and Jeremy Shapiro and Judy Stevens Long were there. And we all made a commitment. There were over 20 people there to keep this going. Yeah, Bart, you were there, to keep this going. And then, of course, COVID happened and the election happened and whatever. And so I'm still committed to that. And I was saying, when we had our retreat for my business, Heads Up World, no technology, in nature, those are our core values of reconnecting people face to face rather than on Facebook. We did it up in a property that my family has up in the Leelanau Peninsula in Michigan, which is right back into nature. And that would be, we can house 38 people there. It's way up in the western part of Lower Michigan. One of our talking about your island experiences, one of our experiences was going out on the beach in the woods and connecting with the natural environment and bringing something back of how that motivated you. Anyway, so I think it can be done, but it's getting people into the place, into a realistic place, not somewhere I couldn't travel like in Peru or whatever. We talked about that, but we all had this energy from being together with Judy and Jeremy, and they really motivated us too. And then nothing happened. Now I will recommit to helping something happen, but I need guidance from the main parent in Santa Barbara to do this. And it's, David, I know you're laughing. I remember when you started, David, I'd already been there for a long time. And so I would certainly dedicate my time, at least in the Michigan. Ziva called it a cluster. I'm not sure if it's, I think more of an alumni intensive would attract me more than that. And even if there were students that we could integrate into that alumni intensive, all getting together, that would add to the sustainability.
Beautiful. Thanks. One or two more people from other groups, ideas we haven't heard, perspectives. Sergey, jump in. Sure.
Yeah, thanks, and great to see you all. This is definitely part of the fielding fix. So my idea has evolved by interacting with our small group. So it would be one of us indeed knowing a place really well, hosting a group for, say, indeed 4 days and 3 nights. And over the course of those 4 days, choosing 8 places there that we would go to and have half a day each for each place. And then we just draw who gets to lead, and they will in some way relate what they know and can do to that place, even if they have never been there, and share some of that knowledge and bring all of us into an improvisation for half a day. And then we would hang out and then go to the next person. And once you've been, it'll take quite a while before you go again, but you can participate in any other session. So that would be like a minimal structure. And Abigail added an open source conference. Apparently there is a format that sort of facilitates this, so we could sort of displace that to an event like that. That was one of the ideas that we discussed among many other beautiful ideas.
Love it.
Dana, Bart, Laura, do you want to summarize our group at all? Cliff?
Just in a very brief way, we talked a little bit about the possibility of a cruise and how that would play out, and then that kind of morphed into a discussion on could we use a retreat type of format like that or an intensive format like that to look at the nature of transformative learning in groups. And that kind of morphed into, well, if we did that, we'd have to be very careful that it didn't turn into a cult, because people already suspect fielding of being a cult anyway, so we'd have to have a no Kool-Aid rule. But other than that, it could work.
If I could just add another thing that was discussed in our group was doing something like a Chautauqua, a riverboat or something like that. I saw Alice in the Pacific Northwest, thanks to the ferry system, we could go from island to island. So that would be another possibility, though that might lose the intensity of just all being together in a cult-like environment. So from fielding fix to fielding cult.
But it's still getting people there. It's whetting their appetites that I want to be a part of this. And it's very much a word of mouth thing, like those of us that maybe were in our celebrations together. It's all these are wonderful, but it's getting the people there.
I'm so excited about the ideas shared, and I know there are lots of others that haven't yet been shared. So I'm thinking that maybe we move on for a few minutes to wrapping up, and Trevor has kind of a gem at the end about continuing this conversation or making space for that possibly to happen, in which ideas that have not yet been voiced could be shared. And he has another request for you. But I'm wondering, could we make a few minutes now for faculty to comment? We can put the slide, well, actually, I like seeing people's faces. Let's forget about the slides. For faculty to comment on what you're hearing and what you're thinking for the future based on your experiences with intensives and what you've heard here. Start with you, Fred.
Yeah, to remember to unmute myself. Thanks, Alice. I mean, I can be brief. I can also be expansive, but I'll just be brief now. I mean, one is the joy of learning with others, and the others include both other people, including other alumni, other places. As Rich was mentioning, the idea of moving from place to place, but holding on to the placeness, but also other, and this came up in our group, Randall mentioned it, the other non-humans. So thinking about intensives with mushrooms, intensives with tree frogs.
What kind of mushrooms?
Yeah. Just think of the possibility, but holding on to the idea that what is happening in this is that we're learning with and moving across boundaries. And what was special about Gabriola, and Diane spoke to this, is that we brought together students, alums, staff, family, neighbors, and Alice, you showed so much trust in us that we weren't going to leave and then have people to ask you, Alice, to leave the island or something like that. Like, where did these people come from? So recognizing the importance of trust in all of this also in designing a future experience.
I think that's something I'll speak to briefly at the end because it came up in our group as a question, and it may be a question for several people. Rich, comments?
Just a couple of thoughts, because all of my thoughts have been shared pretty much by now. So intensives to me offer a couple of things. One, substantive learning. We had intensives in Santa Barbara that focused on housing and homelessness, and we were able to have students meet up with the mayor, the city council, the head of the housing authority, and so on. One of our fielding students at the time, Anthony Beebe, was the head of Santa Barbara City College, who faced a major crisis, and a group of students were able to work with him and actually come up with a breakthrough solution for him. So intensives can also have an impact, but the main value for me is the interactive aspect, sitting around afterwards, having a glass of wine or whatever, and just schmoozing and talking. And finally, I just want to emphasize one thing that has come up repeatedly, the idea of bringing staff along. I have this fantasy that if we had no labels at all, if people from the fielding home office and students and faculty and alum all showed up, you wouldn't know the difference between us. And having Diane on the Gabriola Intensive to me was great because of your humor and what you brought to it as a person that I would never ever get to know through the normal channels. And I think that intensive should, for so many reasons, involve people who work at fielding in various capacities who make it all happen because of what they bring also. So I would pitch that as a central request.
And David.
Thanks so much, Rich. And I also appreciate having everybody together on board, as it were. And I'll echo Fred on the joy of learning. I'd also like to share with all of you the flyer that Trevor had mentioned earlier. I'll try to put it into the chat here a little bit later, but just to quickly share with you, this was the incentive that we gave, and I want to give a great shout out again to Diane, who helped create this. And the students who joined, all of them were able to get credit for 2 KAs doing this. Of course, we had papers and so on as well. You can see from the description here what's special about the place, and then we had day by day and what we were doing, and then almost moment to moment the draft schedule of what we were doing. Pretty much we stuck to this too, I think, Alice.
Pretty close. Yeah.
to note also right near the Haven where we were staying, a place called the Haven, was this beautiful Malaspina Galleries, it's called. It's a famous site on the island, and very, very special place in so many different ways. Anyway, I'll try to share this with y'all. There are so many possibilities for experiences together, this networking kinds of experiences together. I'm thinking about what we have done in other places. In Amsterdam, actually, we had experience. In Washington, D.C., we had an ethnography intensive in Anacostia across the river from the capital area. And of course, in Santa Barbara, as Rich was mentioning, particularly looking around actionable issues. And homelessness, of course, is one of the major actionable issues just about everywhere these days. But joining together is maybe the main message that I would give about intensives, and also self-initiated. If any of you would like to initiate one, we can work on that. Yeah, Nikki, good idea, initiate.
So the last thing I'll say, based on a question in my group and from a couple of others, is about trust. I could speak to that for a long time. It's really important, especially I found in my own community. It's tricky. You know, you're working with multiple identities. The best thing I can suggest is, if you've not read it, there's a book by Sean Wilson, an Indigenous scholar, and he speaks to the 3 principles of Indigenous research. Reciprocity, which Rich and others have spoken to, try to give back. Relationality, which is so important in traditional cultures. Work on those relationships, maintain those relationships, and respect. So that's all I'll say about that in the limited time, but a very important question when you're organizing. And Trevor, back to you for, hopefully we've got 2 minutes for people to send you a note, or at least pick up your email for next steps.
So I think, you know, one of the really fascinating things that's coming out of this conversation, was part of our intention here, is to see what the collective intention, what the energy potential synergy might be, primarily from the, you know, the alumni group. So those of you that are here as alumni, or soon to become alumni, to somehow engage in this notion, this concept of future intensives. And I think, you know, we've already heard some good sparks around, you know, people offering certain spaces, certain locales, certain needs. And I think, you know, there's definitely a role and a space for faculty to play in helping to co-orchestrate future intensives, particularly when it comes to the student element. That becomes pretty obvious. Staff have a role to play in this, you know, some of the support from Fielding, from Hillary and some of the other individuals, but, you know, really taking a look and saying, okay, you know, as an alumni community, what can we bring? How can we help to co-create, co-imagine, co-create, and, you know, co-support this going forward? So I'm popping my email address in the chat. What I've offered to do is to be the I guess the holder initially, the host of some initial conversations amongst alum that are interested in being, you know, potentially part of a thinking group, starting to look at maybe a bit of a model that we could replicate based on some of the past experiences and some of the past successes and the factors going into that. So feel free to pop me an email there. You see it, tmaber@email.fielding.edu. And what I'll do, I'm going to mention this to Hillary, I think, you know, as part of some of the alum communication going out, you know, maybe frame a bit of an invitation to that, and then looking a few weeks for convening maybe an initial online virtual conversation for those of you that are interested in coming back, and just starting to think through, you know, okay, how do we start to piece this together, knowing that, you know, we're, as far as the in-person gatherings, you know, we're still a bit of a crystal ball away from that at the moment, but, you know, there's it's also a good time, good space, good energy to continue to dream about some of the possibilities and some of the needs out there from there. So fantastic. Alice, closing comments, thoughts, and we'll tie it off here.
Quick things. Yeah. I mean, one is we should also thank Abigail Lyman, another faculty member who was present and very much a part of this session. And the other was something that I was thinking about that came to mind when Carl was talking about the Mountain Quest Intensive, and that is that the intensives don't begin at the time when they begin, that the journey there and the journey back home, including thinking about getting back home, is so important. what happened at one of the ones in Mountain Quest was this giant snowstorm was moving in, closing all airports within 200 miles of where the place was in West Virginia. And we had to completely, this is the beauty of working with Charlie, of course, is that you have to be adaptable. Completely transform the end of the intensive to figure out how can we support each other to get back home, including Terrence Chung, who is trying to figure out how to get back to Asia. So the journey is also part of the learning with, and I think that's an important aspect of this.
And before we depart, I want to give a shout out to Hillary, who has done so much work to make this whole alumni event possible.
Thank you so much. This is an absolute joy to see everybody's faces here. Thanks for taking the time to join. And my goodness, I love working with all of you. I have the best job here. Thank you, everyone. I got to stop this meeting, jump on a new one. Make sure you go to the attendee hub and you can see this recording, and we'll put some extra information there as well. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.